Hello, my name is Mark Clennon. I am an artist that specializes in editorial, commercial, and documentary photography. I like to say that I've had a very long career in a short amount of time, right? I've shot features for Time Magazine. I've sold art in Chelsea. I've presented at universities my work. I've shot birthday parties. I've done a little bit of everything, including concerts and festivals. So, that's why I like to say I've had a very long career in a short amount of time. And I've been doing photography. I picked up the camera for the first time actually 5 years ago from zero experience. And my friends always ask me, like, you've only been doing this 5 years? Like, the math, show me the math on that. The math isn't mathing for me right now. How is that you've been doing all of these things in such a short amount of time? And I think it's because I kind of found my point of view early on. I've been very privileged today to work as a photographer, to have my work featured in Times Square and Time Magazine, and work with companies like Apple and Nike and Snapchat. I'm very blessed to have been able to do these things, and I think it's because I found out my specific point of view and how I can amplify that to create impactful work, right? So I'm from Florida. Born and raised, and I moved to New York after college to work in tech, and I was just so excited. I was so excited to be in New York. I just started pulling out my iPhone and just taking a bunch of photos with my camera, just of buildings, people watching, and things that were new and interesting to me as a Floridian, because I had never been to New York City. And I started getting really good, and my friends would ask me like, hey, what kind of camera do you use? I'm like, oh, I just use my phone, it's light. But then it really encouraged me to try to use a different type of device, like a DSLR, like a Canon. So I picked up a Canon. Actually, my mom got it for me for Christmas, the $300 starter cameras. And I went out, I took a few photos, and I went home and I put the camera down and sat there for a year. It was too hard. And I think the reason why it was too hard, I was just afraid of looking like a beginner. You know what I'm saying? So once I got over that hump a year later, picked up the camera again, I really started to find my narrative and what I was trying to do. So I went from taking photos with my iPhone of buildings and cityscapes to really implementing people's faces. And I found that implementing people's faces, from my point of view, is a more effective way of being a storyteller, right? Because when we talk about storytelling, I think that it's cross-generational, right? Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomers, millennials, like we all are storytellers in our own way, right? We're directors, we're YouTubers, we're podcasters, we're writers, we're reporters. We're all trying to tell a story from our perspective and point of view. And that's really where my work started to grow a lot more, when I started to take photos from my perspective, right? And as a Black creative, part of me at first, where I was like, I gotta show larger America, AKA white people, like, look how viable Black people are, and look how we can be in these commercial campaigns, look how special Black people are. But then when I realized I needed to tweak my point of view a little bit more, when I'm talking about who my audience is, right? These are all things I have to take into consider. And I realized my audience before was kind of like, oh, my audience is kind of larger American white people, when really my real true audience is Black people, right? So that should be the point of view that I'm speaking to and speaking from, right? So my mission as an artist is to tell the totality of the Black experience, our joys, our pains, our triumphs, our fears, our anxieties. Like, I want to tell the full scope of what it means to be Black here in America from my point of view. And I think that once I found my point of view, and once I found my perspective, things became very clear for me of where I wanted to go as an artist. Like, I want to talk about, like, we have a right to be mad sometimes. We have a right to be angry sometimes. We have a right to forgive and fall in love. Now, these are all parts of what it means to be Black in this time, right? And Nina Simone said it best: an artist's duty is to reflect the times. And in order to best reflect the times, you have to really give yourself an accurate depiction of what your point of view is, right? And so, like, that is how we can lock in, whether it be photography or any other creative pursuit, is really locking in what your mission statement is and what your point of view is. And we can go ahead and, like, define what point of view is, right? Point of view, a narrator's position to a story that's being told, right? So how does this story relate to me specifically, right? What is my interaction with this scene, and why am I, the artist, deeming it important to capture, important to talk about, right? And then the position from which an object is being viewed. That's another definition of point of view, and that's literally my angle, right? So I'm low, I'm high, I'm to the left, I'm to the right, I'm far away, I'm close. I'm really trying to figure out my exact point of view, right? And those are the internal questions that I like to ask myself. So that brings me to, my experience as a black man in America, my experience as a Floridian artist. And one of the things that I think is so special that happened to me in the past year is really locking in on my point of view. So all these things that I've been working on this long, short career came together and converged. So like, to recap really quickly, I'm asking myself certain questions like, what's my point of view, my relation to the story, my position in which the story is being viewed, and then, what is my point of view on a linear time scale too? So like, how is this image important compared to the past, and how will it feel in the future? And that's the thing I love about photography and making photos, because you can lose a photo, and you can find it in a closet, and you rediscover it, and it has a new meaning to you because you've matured, right? You've matured, you've grown, you have more experiences, your point of view has changed, so the image changes. So it's kind of a reflection of me when I view an image for the second time, right? So when we talk about point of view, we want to think about these things. And that brings me to last year covering some of the protests that were happening. I live a few blocks from here on Lenox Avenue. And the protest was going by in May 30th. And I attended protests in the past, 2014, 2016, for Eric Garner, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, then the names go on and on. But this year felt different, right? We're in a pandemic last year, an ongoing pandemic into 2021 as well. And so when I saw people marching down Lenox Avenue, I grabbed my camera, just one camera, just to tell the story. And I asked myself that self-dialogue, okay, how can I contribute to this? Like, I can't hold a megaphone and rally the crowd, but maybe I can just offer some photos, right? So when I went downstairs and joined the protest, I wanted to use my point of view to inform the images that I was taking. So I'm asking myself, let me capture photos of people asking themselves the same question. How can I contribute, right? So then I found myself taking photos of people passing out PPE, passing out masks, passing out hand sanitizer, things that are very unique to this set of protests that were happening in 2020, and they're asking themselves the same question. I might not be able to walk down to Times Square from Harlem, but I can stay here and pass out water bottles from my car, to help the movement and help everything that's going on, And that brings me, to this image here. The post went viral, and it was used on hoodies in Germany to attend protests. It was used on flyers in France to promote protests for Black lives across the world. So as these things were happening, my audience changed. Now, instead of shooting for myself with my own camera, I'm shooting for the New Yorker, and my audience is different now. The people that I'm speaking to are different. So I want to reassess my point of view here and really remind the viewer that this is the black man making these photos and telling these stories. And it's not just a large group of angry people that we're talking about in these protests. These are individual humans that decided that it was more important for them to risk contracting COVID-19 than it would be to be silent and sharing their stories and making their voices heard for Black lives. This image, which is an image of Mount Sinai Black doctors that came down from the hospital and raised their fists in support of the protests. And when we talk about like my point of view, my mother is a healthcare worker. She had me in college at FAMU. She eventually became a doctor. She graduated when I was in high school. It took her that long, but she finally got it done as a student. And then so when I saw these Black doctors coming down from the hospital, raising their fists in support of the protest, I literally saw my mother in these women with their fists raised. They looked like my mother. It felt like my mother. There were other photographers there, but my point of view, my previous experience led me to see this scene and deem it to be important and impactful. And that's when I snapped the photo. So that's how we can use, our point of view in a broad sense to really capture, what we're seeing in front of us in an impactful way. And this image is also important to me because when we think about the civil rights movement in the 60s, and the pins that they had that are in museums now, they were selling these same pins. They just have different slogans on them. Black Lives Matter instead of March for Freedom. Colin Kaepernick instead of Sidney Poitier, right? So these images are important, and you know they were going to age in a very special way moving forward. And one thing I always wanted to capture during those times is Black people taking control of their narrative, right? This is the first time in history where we have phones in our pockets. We have our iPhone, we have our Android. We can take a picture and give a first-person account of what it's like to be on the streets, what it's like to be on the streets fighting and protesting for your rights, what it's like to be a normal Black person deciding that it's worth risking contracting COVID to make your voice heard. So this is a very special time in image making, and it's a very special time in the reclamation of what it means to be Black and owning your own story and your own narrative. And I wanted to make sure to capture a lot of Black people, you know, making their own photos and documenting their own lives, because this is the first time in history where we really have the access for everybody to do so, right? So, you know, this is a series of photos of my friend in Times Square. I saw her from across Times Square and I ran over as she was getting arrested, and I'm yelling at the police, like, why are you doing this? Because she wasn't doing anything threatening at all towards the police. They just decided at that moment they were just going to arrest somebody, and it just happened to be my friend. And as you can see in some of these images, my hand is in the photo because I'm yelling at the police officers while simultaneously taking photos, which was very interesting to view it in this lens, really inserting myself into an image like this to really remind us that, hey, you know, there's a Black person, a part of this, there's a part of this experience, and it's happening live, and it gives us a different feeling of that first person experience. So when we talk about point of view, you know, these things are also what we want to keep in mind. And, you know, credit to Rhea, who lives just a few blocks away from here. She was arrested and was released about 11 hours later, and the next day she was out protesting again. That brings me to this photo of a man with a raised fist in front of Trump Tower that went viral. And there's a lot of reasons that it went viral. It's a very Black image. You know, we have the American flag, we have the golden facade that is housing this flag. Is it accessible to us, or is it finding solace in the protection of this facade? So, you know, when this photo went viral, you know, inspired artists from all over the world to give their renditions of it. It was published in dozens of countries around the world. I went from basically sitting at my house to then fielding emails from The Ellen Show to BET commercials to Time Magazine. These things, it was a whirlwind of emotions that were happening so quickly from just being in a sedentary space because of the pandemic. But there was still more work to be done. And because I had a very strong point of view, it was really concrete on what my opinions were and who I was as a Black person and as a man in this country, you know, I was able to establish a very strong point of view. And that can be applicable to any discipline. Making sure that you have your mission statement as a person, as a creative, and staying true to your point of view will give you the most effective way to tell a compelling story. So thank you.